The Congressional Black Caucus meeting fell silent as Representative Jasmine Crockett stood at the podium, her expression composed but determined. Across from her, Democratic House Leader Hakeem Jeffries leaned forward in his chair, his normally calm demeanor replaced with visible frustration. "With all due respect, Representative Crockett," Jeffries said, his voice cutting through the tense atmosphere, "your proposed strategy directly contradicts the consensus this caucus reached last week." The cameras captured Crockett's momentary pause as she glanced down at the document in her hands, statistical evidence that nobody expected her to have. For weeks, Jeffries had been promoting a measured approach to police reform legislation, carefully navigating political sensitivities ahead of the midterms. But Crockett, the freshman representative from Texas, had come prepared with something that would challenge not just his strategy, but his leadership. "Mr. Leader," she replied, her voice steady and clear, "perhaps you should examine the data before interrupting me again." What happened in the next 30 seconds didn't just silence Jeffries, it revealed a truth that could reshape the Democratic Party's entire approach to one of America's most divisive issues. Before we dive deeper into this remarkable confrontation, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss our latest political analyses. Before this pivotal moment in the Congressional Black Caucus meeting, both House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries and Representative Jasmine Crockett had traveled very different paths to reach this political confrontation. Hakeem Jeffries, at 53, had spent years methodically building his reputation as a steady, strategic leader within the Democratic Party. Born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, Jeffries had earned law degrees from both New York University and Georgetown before entering politics. He had served in the New York State Assembly before winning his congressional seat in 2012, representing New York's 8th District. Jeffries' rise within the Democratic leadership had been impressive by any standard. After serving as chair of the House Democratic Caucus from 2019 to 2023, he had succeeded Nancy Pelosi as House Democratic leader following her step back from leadership. Known for his measured rhetoric, strategic thinking, and ability to balance progressive values with political pragmatism, Jeffries had become the face of a Democratic Party trying to maintain unity while navigating complex political terrain. "Politics is the art of the possible," was one of Jeffries' frequent refrains, delivered in his characteristically calm, deliberate speaking style. His approach to leadership emphasized building consensus, avoiding unnecessary controversy, and focusing on winnable battles, qualities that had earned him respect from both moderate and progressive wings of the party, even when they disagreed with his specific decisions. Recently, Jeffries had been advocating for a cautious approach to police reform legislation. With midterm elections approaching and polls showing voters concerned about both public safety and police accountability, he had been pushing for what he called achievable reforms, a package of modest changes that might attract bipartisan support while avoiding Republican attacks about defunding the police. In contrast, Representative Jasmine Crockett represented a newer generation in American politics. At 42, the former civil rights attorney had made headlines when she won her congressional seat after serving in the Texas House of Representatives. Born to a military family, Crockett had worked her way through law school before dedicating her career to civil rights cases in Texas, often representing clients in police misconduct cases. Her election to Congress had been remarkable, winning a competitive primary by focusing on criminal justice reform, voting rights, and economic opportunity. Unlike many first-term representatives who took time to find their footing, Crockett had quickly established herself as someone unafraid to challenge party leadership when she believed they were compromising too readily on core issues. Behind the scenes, Crockett had been methodically gathering data on police reform outcomes across America. While many of her colleagues relied on staff for research, Crockett was known for her prosecutor's attention to detail, often spending late nights analyzing data herself. Her legal background gave her insights that many political veterans lacked, particularly on issues related to criminal justice. The current conflict had been brewing for weeks. Jeffries had been working with committee chairs to craft what he called a pragmatic police reform package that focused on increased training, limited reforms to qualified immunity, and modest increases in funding for community-based interventions. His approach was designed to appeal to swing district Democrats worried about appearing anti-police in their upcoming campaigns. In leadership meetings, Jeffries had emphasized electoral strategy. "We need to win these swing districts to maintain our chance at reclaiming the House," he had argued. That means considering how these issues play in purple districts. not just safe blue ones. The strategy had gained support from many Democratic representatives, particularly those from competitive districts. Even within the Congressional Black Caucus, many members had reluctantly agreed that Jeffries' approach represented their best chance at achieving any reform in the current political environment. However, Crockett had been quietly unconvinced. Having represented clients in police misconduct cases, she believed the proposed reforms were insufficient to address systemic problems. More importantly, she had been analyzing data that suggested stronger reforms actually increased public safety, while reducing police violence data that contradicted the conventional political wisdom driving Jeffries' approach. For 3 weeks, Crockett had been reviewing case studies from cities and states that had implemented various police reforms, comparing outcomes across different approaches. She had also commissioned a polling analysis that examined how voters actually responded to different reform proposals when presented with evidence about their effectiveness, rather than just political framing. The Congressional Black Caucus meeting that day had been expected to focus on finalizing the caucus's unified support for Jeffries' approach. Several members had already spoken in favor of the strategic necessity of the compromise package, with Jeffries scheduled to give concluding remarks, reinforcing the importance of party unity heading into a difficult election cycle. Instead, when recognized to speak, Crockett had begun by questioning whether the caucus was fulfilling its historical mission by accepting such limited reforms. Our predecessors in this caucus didn't achieve historic changes by accepting what was politically convenient, she had said. They fought for what was necessary, even when it was difficult. As she began to present her alternative approach, backed by data on both policy effectiveness and electoral strategy, Jeffries had interrupted her, something he rarely did to members, especially in public settings. His interruption reflected growing frustration with what he perceived as naivety about political realities. What he didn't realize was that Crockett had anticipated this moment and had prepared not just policy arguments, but evidence that challenged the fundamental assumptions driving his political strategy. As Crockett stood at the podium, document in hand, the tension in the room was palpable. Members shifted uncomfortably, sensing that this wasn't going to be a typical disagreement easily resolved through compromise. Cable news cameras zoomed in, capturing what was quickly becoming an unexpected confrontation between the Democratic leader and a rising star many had already identified as representing the future of the party. The caucus meeting room in the Rayburn House office building hummed with tension as Representative Jasmine Crockett organized her materials at the podium. The wood-paneled chamber, with its blue carpet and formal arrangement of tables where senior members sat, had hosted countless policy discussions, but rarely such a direct challenge to leadership. Jeffries' interruption had created an uncomfortable silence. Other caucus members glanced between the two representatives, unsure how this breach of decorum would play out. The C-SPAN cameras that had been routinely recording the public portion of the meeting now focused intensely on this unexpected confrontation. Representative Crockett, Jeffries said, his voice measured but firm, "We've all heard passionate arguments for stronger reforms, but politics requires pragmatism. The package I've proposed reflects what can actually pass in this environment while protecting our vulnerable members in swing districts." Crockett nodded slightly, acknowledging his point. "Leader Jeffries, I respect your political instincts and your leadership. But I believe your strategy is based on outdated assumptions about both policy effectiveness and political reality." She held up a folder. "I've analyzed reform outcomes from 27 jurisdictions that implemented different approaches to police accountability over the past decade. The data contradicts our conventional wisdom in significant ways." Crockett opened the folder and pulled out her first exhibit, a chart comparing public safety outcomes across cities with different reform approaches. "First, let's address the core concern about public safety that's driving our cautious approach. This analysis tracks violent crime rates in cities that implemented comprehensive reforms versus those that took the incremental approach we're currently considering." She placed the chart on the document camera, projecting it onto the large screen behind her. Cities that implemented stronger accountability measures, including civilian oversight with subpoena power and modified qualified immunity standards, saw violent crime rates decrease by an average of 14% within 3 years. Cities that focused primarily on training and limited reforms saw only a 3% decrease. Jeffries leaned forward, studying the chart with a furrowed brow. "Representative Crockett, correlation doesn't imply causation. There could be numerous factors explaining these differences." "You're absolutely right, Leader Jeffries," Crockett responded, surprising him with her agreement. That's why I didn't stop at simple correlation analysis. She pulled out a second document. This is a multivariate regression analysis, controlling for demographic factors, economic conditions, and pre-existing crime trends. The relationship between stronger accountability measures and improved public safety remains statistically significant at the p is less than 0.01 level. A murmur spread through the caucus. Crockett wasn't just making passionate arguments, she was presenting sophisticated data analysis that challenged their political assumptions. Furthermore, she continued, pulling out another document, cities that implemented these stronger measures saw a 23% decrease in civil settlements for police misconduct, representing both improved police behavior and significant taxpayer savings. Jeffries interrupted again, his tone reflecting growing frustration. Representative Crockett, policy effectiveness isn't the only consideration here. We have members in districts where any perceived anti-police stance could be politically devastating. We have to consider electoral realities. Crockett nodded again. I anticipated that concern, Leader Jeffries. She produced another document. This is polling data from swing districts, including those of our most vulnerable members. But unlike standard polls that simply ask about support for police reform, a term that has been effectively weaponized, this survey presented specific policies along with data about their effectiveness. She placed the first document on the camera. When voters understand that these accountability measures actually improve public safety and reduce taxpayer costs from misconduct settlements, support increases dramatically even among Republican-leaning independents. In fact, 64% of swing voters expressed support for comprehensive reforms when presented with evidence of their effectiveness. Crockett turned to face Jeffries directly. The problem isn't that voters oppose effective reform. The problem is that we've allowed our opponents to frame the debate around false choices between safety and accountability, rather than showing how proper accountability enhances safety. Representative Jim Clyburn, the respected party elder from South Carolina, spoke up. Representative Crockett, your analysis is compelling, but Leader Jeffries' concern about political attacks remains valid. How do you propose we counter the inevitable soft-on-crime narratives? An excellent question, Whip Clyburn, Crockett replied, pulling out yet another document. This media analysis tracks how reform messages were covered in local news across different districts. When Democrats proactively presented reforms as public safety measures, backed by data on effectiveness, negative coverage decreased by 37% compared to districts where representatives used defensive messaging that accepted the safety versus accountability framing. She projected a series of local news headlines that showed how different messaging approaches had been covered. The data suggests we're most vulnerable when we accept our opponent's framing and offer watered-down alternatives. We're strongest when we reframe the entire debate around what actually works to keep communities safe. Jeffries, visibly processing this information, posed another challenge. Representative Crockett, even if your analysis is correct, legislation requires votes. The package I've proposed might attract moderate Republican support. Your approach would likely face unified opposition. Crockett didn't hesitate. Leader Jeffries, I've also analyzed voting patterns on state-level reforms. She produced a chart showing legislative outcomes across different states. When reforms were presented as comprehensive public safety packages that happened to include accountability measures, rather than as police reform bills, they attracted bipartisan support in 72% of state legislatures that considered them. She projected examples from Republican-controlled state legislatures in Georgia, Utah, and Indiana that had passed significant accountability measures when framed as public safety enhancements. The key is changing the conversation from whether to reform policing to how best to ensure public safety through evidence-based approaches. For nearly 15 minutes, Crockett continued presenting data, addressing each objection with specific evidence rather than general principles or values statements. The dynamic in the room shifted noticeably as caucus members began asking substantive questions about her findings rather than dismissing them as politically naive. Representative Terry Sewell from Alabama raised her hand. Representative Crockett, I represent a district that includes both Birmingham, where police reform is a major priority, and rural areas where law enforcement support runs deep. How would your approach work in such divided districts? Another excellent question, Representative Sewell. Crockett responded. She pulled out data specific to mixed urban-rural districts. When representatives from districts like yours emphasized improved outcomes for both communities and police officers, including reduced officer injuries and improved community cooperation with Investigations support increased across demographic groups. Rural voters actually supported comprehensive reforms at a 54% rate when presented with evidence about how they improve officer safety and departmental effectiveness. As the discussion continued, Jeffries remained largely silent, studying Crockett's materials with increasing intensity. The confrontation had evolved into something unexpected, not an emotional clash between competing values, but a substantive reconsideration of political strategy based on evidence. Finally, Representative Joyce Beatty from Ohio addressed Jeffries directly. Leader Jeffries, Representative Crockett has presented compelling evidence that challenges some of our fundamental assumptions. How should this information affect our approach moving forward? All eyes turned to Jeffries. The room fell silent, awaiting his response. The confrontation had reached its pivotal moment. Would the Democratic leader dismiss this challenge from a freshman representative, or would he engage with evidence that contradicted his strategic judgment? Jeffries looked up from the documents, his expression unreadable. Representative Crockett, he began, his voice measured, you've clearly done extensive research on this issue. He paused, considering his next words carefully. The entire caucus waited, tension building in the room. Jeffries removed his reading glasses and placed them deliberately on the table before him, a gesture that those familiar with his habits recognized as signaling serious consideration. The room remained completely silent, all attention focused on the Democratic leader's response to Crockett's unexpected challenge. Representative Crockett, Jeffries began again, his tone notably different from earlier. When you began presenting alternative data, my initial reaction was skepticism. Not because I questioned your intelligence or commitment, but because I've spent years navigating the political complexities of these issues. He picked up one of Crockett's charts, holding it so the caucus could see it. But I've always prided myself on following evidence, even when it challenges my assumptions. And I must acknowledge that your analysis here is not just passionate advocacy, it's substantive research that deserves serious consideration. A subtle shift occurred in the room, slight movements as members leaned forward, recognizing they were witnessing something rare in politics. A leader publicly reconsidering his position based on new evidence. Your multivariate analysis of outcomes in cities with different reform approaches is particularly compelling, Jeffries continued. The data suggesting stronger accountability measures correlate with improved public safety contradicts assumptions that have guided our strategic approach. He turned to face Crockett directly. Most significantly, your polling analysis showing how voters respond to evidence-based messaging challenges our defensive posture on these issues. If presenting comprehensive reforms as public safety measures genuinely resonates with swing voters, that would fundamentally alter our strategic calculations. Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, a senior member from Texas, spoke up. Leader Jeffries, are you suggesting we should reconsider our approach to the police reform legislation? Jeffries nodded slowly. I believe Representative Crockett's evidence warrants a serious recalibration of our strategy. Not an abandonment of pragmatism, we still need legislation that can pass, but perhaps our definition of what's politically possible has been unnecessarily constrained by outdated assumptions. He turned back to Crockett. Would you be willing to work with my office and the relevant committee chairs to integrate your findings into a revised approach? The question hung in the air for a moment, not just a professional courtesy, but a significant acknowledgement that a freshman representative had meaningfully influenced the party's strategic direction on a major issue. Crockett's composed expression briefly showed surprise before she regained her professional demeanor. I would be honored, Leader Jeffries. My goal has always been to help our caucus achieve meaningful reform that actually improves public safety and accountability. Jeffries nodded. Then, let's reorganize our approach based on evidence rather than conventional political wisdom. Because while we debate strategy, communities continue to need both effective public safety and genuine accountability. Representative James Clyburn, the respected party elder, spoke up again. This is how our caucus should function, challenging each other with evidence, not just rhetoric. Representative Crockett, your preparation and substantive approach represent the best traditions of this body. The caucus room, which had earlier been filled with tension, now buzzed with energy as members began discussing the implications of Crockett's data for their individual districts and messaging approaches. What happened next demonstrated Jeffries' leadership qualities in a different light. Rather than moving to end the discussion and save face, he engaged directly with Crockett's evidence, asking specific questions about methodology and applicability across different district types. Your analysis of media coverage in different districts is particularly relevant to our messaging strategy, Jeffries noted, pointing to one of Crockett's exhibits. Have you found specific language or framing that proves most effective at countering soft-on-crime narratives? Crockett, now standing alongside Jeffries rather than opposite him, pulled out additional materials. Yes, Leader Jeffries. When representatives frame accountability measures as ensuring that resources go to effective public safety approaches rather than restricting police, coverage is significantly more positive. Emphasizing taxpayer savings from reduced misconduct settlements also resonates strongly with fiscal conservatives. For the next 20 minutes, what had begun as a confrontation transformed into a collaborative strategy session, with Crockett's evidence serving as the foundation for a reimagined approach to one of the party's most challenging issues. Representative Colin Allred from Texas, who represented a swing district, raised his hand. Representative Crockett, your data about messaging in mixed districts is directly relevant to my situation. Would you be willing to share more detailed findings about how different constituencies respond to specific policy proposals? Absolutely, Representative Allred, Crockett responded. I've compiled district-specific analyses for members in competitive seats. The evidence suggests that comprehensive reforms, when properly framed around effectiveness and fiscal responsibility, can actually strengthen your position rather than making you vulnerable. As the discussion continued, several committee chairs who had initially been skeptical began engaging substantively with Crockett's findings, asking how they might incorporate her evidence-based approach into their legislative strategies. The pivotal moment came when Jeffries himself proposed a concrete next step. I believe we should establish a working group, co-chaired by Representative Crockett and a senior member with legislative experience, to revise our approach based on this evidence. We need to maintain our commitment to pragmatism while expanding our understanding of what's politically achievable. He looked around the room. Any objections to proceeding in this manner? The silence that followed represented not just acceptance but genuine consensus, a remarkable outcome given the confrontational beginning of the discussion. As the meeting drew to a close, representatives gathered around Crockett, examining her materials and asking follow-up questions. What had begun as a challenge to leadership had transformed into a model of evidence-based policymaking that strengthened rather than fractured caucus unity. Jeffries approached Crockett as members were leaving. Representative Crockett, your presentation today exemplifies what we need more of in Congress: substantive analysis rather than just passionate advocacy. You've changed my thinking on this issue, and that doesn't happen often. Crockett nodded respectfully. Thank you, Leader Jeffries. Your willingness to engage with evidence that challenges existing strategies demonstrates true leadership. Many in your position would have dismissed these findings to maintain their original position. Jeffries smiled slightly. In Brooklyn, we have a saying, if the facts change, your mind should too. Politics is indeed the art of the possible, but sometimes our understanding of what's possible needs updating based on new evidence. As the caucus room emptied, reporters gathered outside, having heard rumors of an unexpected confrontation between the Democratic leader and a freshman representative. They were already crafting headlines about internal party discord and leadership challenges. What they didn't yet understand was that the story they were about to report was fundamentally different, not a story of conflict but one of evidence-based recalibration. Not a challenge to leadership but an enhancement of it. In the hallway outside, a senior Democratic strategist was overheard telling a colleague, "Jeffries just demonstrated why he's our leader, and Crockett showed why she represents the future of this caucus." That wasn't just conflict resolution, it was a masterclass in how politics should work. The aftermath of the remarkable exchange between House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries and Representative Jasmine Crockett extended far beyond the Congressional Black Caucus meeting room, creating significant ripples throughout Washington and reshaping the national conversation around police reform. Within hours, clips of their exchange had spread across social media and cable news. The initial framing focused on conflict freshman rep challenges Democratic leader, but quickly evolved as the substantive nature of the interaction became clear. By evening news broadcasts, the narrative had shifted to evidence-based approach reshapes Democrats' police reform strategy. Major news networks featured analysis of what commentators were calling a rare moment of substantive policy recalibration. CNN's chief political analyst observed, "What we witnessed wasn't the usual congressional theater of competing soundbites. This was something we rarely see: a senior leader genuinely reconsidering strategy based on compelling evidence presented by a junior colleague." Even conservative outlets noted the significance of the exchange. A Fox News analyst commented, "Whether you agree with their policy direction or not, This represents a more substantive approach than we typically see. Crockett came with data, not just rhetoric, and Jeffries responded to evidence rather than simply asserting authority. For Crockett, the aftermath brought new national prominence. Her office received countless media requests, and her social media following increased by over 150,000 inches just 48 hours. More significantly, her evidence-based approach gained attention from policy experts who had previously overlooked contributions from junior representatives. The Brookings Institution published an analysis titled "Crockett's Evidence-Based Approach to Police Reform: A New Model for Democratic Policy Development." Their assessment was measured but meaningful. While questions remain about implementation details, Representative Crockett's data-driven approach represents a potentially significant evolution in how Democrats approach politically challenging issues. 3 days after the caucus meeting, Crockett appeared on Meet the Press, where the host immediately referenced her exchange with Jeffries. "Congresswoman, you appeared to change Leader Jeffries' thinking on police reform strategy with your presentation. Was this your intention going into that meeting?" Crockett's response demonstrated the thoughtfulness that was becoming her trademark. "My goal wasn't to challenge leadership for its own sake. My goal was to ensure our caucus makes decisions based on the best available evidence." Too often in Washington, we allow conventional wisdom to override actual data about what policies work and how voters respond when properly informed. When asked about her preparation for the meeting, Crockett revealed something that further enhanced her growing reputation. As a former civil rights attorney who represented clients in police misconduct cases, I understand these issues from both policy and practical perspectives. I personally analyzed the data from different jurisdictions, looking for patterns that might inform more effective approaches. This hands-on, evidence-based approach resonated across the political spectrum. A comment on the interview's YouTube page with thousands of likes read, "Whether you agree with her policies or not, this is what actual representation should look like. People who do the work, rather than just repeating talking points." For Jeffries, the aftermath brought a different kind of attention. Some initial coverage questioned whether the exchange represented a weakening of his leadership. However, his thoughtful engagement with Crockett's evidence and willingness to adjust course quickly reframed the narrative. In a widely shared interview on MSNBC, Jeffries addressed the exchange directly. "Leadership isn't about having all the answers or never changing course. It's about ensuring we make the best possible decisions based on all available information." When Representative Crockett presented compelling evidence that some of our strategic assumptions needed reconsideration, engaging with that evidence wasn't just appropriate, it was necessary. This response shifted the narrative from questioning Jeffries' authority to praising his adaptive leadership style. Political analysts noted that in an era where politicians rarely admit reconsideration, Jeffries had demonstrated a different model of leadership that might actually be more effective at building genuine consensus. 1 week after the caucus meeting, the most significant development occurred when Jeffries and Crockett announced the formation of the Evidence-Based Policy Working Group on Police Reform. Their joint statement read, "While maintaining our commitment to achievable legislation, this bipartisan working group will ensure our approach is guided by evidence about what actually works to improve both public safety and accountability." The announcement included endorsements from representatives across the pro-Democratic spectrum, from moderates in competitive districts to progressives in safe seats, suggesting a potential breakthrough in an issue that had long divided the caucus. Policy experts noted the significance of this collaboration. Jeffries brings political savvy and legislative experience, while Crockett brings fresh analysis and substantive expertise on criminal justice issues, said the Director of Criminal Justice Reform at a leading think tank. Together, they might bridge the gap between political strategy and evidence-based policy that has often hindered meaningful reform. State and local officials also took notice. Within 2 weeks, several major city mayors expressed interest in implementing approaches based on the data Crockett had presented. The moderate Democratic mayor of Phoenix noted, "Representative Crockett's evidence about how comprehensive accountability measures actually improve public safety offers a way forward that serves all our communities." Perhaps most revealing were the responses from law enforcement organizations. While national police unions remained skeptical, several state and local associations expressed cautious openness to evidence-based reforms. The president of a state police officers association in Michigan commented, "If the data genuinely shows these approaches improve officer safety while enhancing community trust, we have an obligation to consider them." During a town hall in her district, Crockett was approached by a former police officer who had initially opposed her election. "I watched your presentation to the caucus online," he told her. "For the first time I heard someone talk about these issues using actual evidence rather than just rhetoric. You're talking about outcomes that would benefit good officers as well as communities." Reform advocacy groups that had previously criticized Democratic leadership for insufficient boldness reassessed their approach. The executive director of a major criminal justice reform organization released a statement saying, "Representative Crockett has shown that evidence-based advocacy can be more effective than purely values-based arguments. Her approach maintains moral clarity about the need for reform while using data to overcome political obstacles." Academic institutions responded as well. Georgetown University's Law Center announced a research initiative studying the effectiveness of different police reform approaches, directly citing the Jeffries-Crockett exchange as inspiration for bridging academic research and practical policymaking. The exchange influenced the broader political landscape beyond police reform. Political strategists noted that Crockett had demonstrated a model for how junior representatives could influence party direction through substantive contribution rather than merely public criticism. "What we saw in that caucus room wasn't just a policy discussion," noted a veteran Democratic strategist. "It was a template for how the party might resolve internal differences more productively through evidence-based recalibration rather than ideological litmus tests or personality conflicts." 6 months after the Porter caucus meeting, the working group co-chaired by Jeffries and Crockett released comprehensive recommendations. The document, titled Evidence-Based Approaches to Public Safety and Accountability, integrated political strategy with substantive policy in ways that transcended previous divisions within the party. Its introduction captured the spirit of their collaboration. Effective public policy requires both moral clarity about our goals and evidence-based approaches to achieving them. This framework aims to improve public safety, enhance accountability, and build community trust through approaches proven effective across diverse jurisdictions. The recommendations received bipartisan attention, with several moderate Republicans expressing openness to elements of the approach. While comprehensive legislation remained challenging in a divided Congress, the Jeffries-Crockett framework shifted the debate from abstract ideological positions to concrete questions of effectiveness. For Crockett personally, the experience transformed her position in Congress. No longer viewed simply as a promising newcomer, she became recognized as a substantive policy voice who could influence party direction through evidence rather than just advocacy. In a profile 1 year after the caucus meeting, a major publication dubbed her the data-driven progressive, noting, "In an era of performative politics driven by social media moments, Representative Crockett has charted a different path, one grounded in thorough analysis, legal expertise, and an unwavering focus on actual outcomes rather than just symbolic victories." Jeffries, when asked about Crockett in a separate interview, offered perhaps the most significant endorsement. "In my years in Congress, I've seen many talented representatives come and go. What distinguishes Representative Crockett is her commitment to substantive mastery of complex issues. She doesn't just advocate, she analyzes, synthesizes, and presents evidence in ways that genuinely advance our understanding." The Jeffries-Crockett exchange became a case study in effective policy development, referenced by political scientists and cited by commentators as an example of how evidence-based approaches might overcome political polarization. As one political historian noted, "What made this exchange significant wasn't just what was said, but how policy was developed as a result, with evidence guiding strategy rather than strategy determining which evidence is considered." In our polarized era, it demonstrated a path toward more effective governance. The legacy of their exchange continued to influence Democratic policy development in subsequent years, serving as a model for how the party might navigate politically challenging issues through evidence-based approaches rather than purely ideological positioning or defensive triangulation. For Americans concerned about both public safety and police accountability, the collaboration born from that remarkable caucus meeting represented something too rarely seen in modern politics: the possibility that evidence might actually matter more than ideology in shaping how we address our most difficult challenges. If you found this analysis of political effectiveness valuable, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. We'll continue bringing you in-depth coverage of the most significant political developments that actually impact policy outcomes. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming analysis of the new public safety framework and what it could mean for communities across America.